Much for speaking with us.
Great, thank you.
And also co-chair of Building Bridges, is that right, in Asheville?
No, I am not. I am the former co-chair of Building Bridges. Currently, the co-chairs are Alexandria Ravenel and Rebecca Bernstein, both of whom are doing an excellent job.
Great, thanks for clearing that up. We've been wondering, with your experience with the term equity as it's coming up more in organizations and also maybe in language that's being used, nonprofits and otherwise, I wonder how you see that play out in an organization, even as it's not a reality, and how that role plays out.
Well, so first of all, I think that it's really interesting and common that people not fully understand what equity means, right? And oftentimes people want to use it interchangeably with equality. And even if people are aware enough to understand that equity is not equality, they have a difficult time putting it into words. So I recently heard an excellent illustration of what equity is compared to equality at the White Privilege Conference. And someone said, equality is giving everybody a pair of shoes. Equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fits. So, first of all, there's the explanation of what the difference is to really get people to sit and settle in with what that could look like in an organization. So, you are absolutely right to characterize it as equity and social justice now are trendy terms, particularly here in Asheville and Western North Carolina, and in a lot of organizational spaces. And people include it in their mission statements, right, as a sign that we are perhaps enlightened or progressive or moving someplace. But then there's that other layer of having an organization do a culture shift, sort of an ideological shift with equity. And that's a very hard thing to do. It takes, I think, a lot of training, but not just going through one training or two trainings, but actually the ongoing work after the training of continuing the discussion. Because as you are well aware, and perhaps many of your viewers are well aware, that after a training, things come to you and occur to you and become more real at different levels and different layers and at different times. And so it's necessary to not only repeat trainings or do other trainings, but also to have a dedicated person in a dedicated space to be able to process all that you're learning and continuing to learn even outside of the training. That's one level where we find it's difficult to institutionalize equity in an organization. Then there's the deeper level. Once that ideological and cultural shift has happened in an organization, and what we're talking about oftentimes, particularly in my spaces with the employees, the people who work within an organization, there is the business of actually institutionalizing equity, right? Which is really deinstitutionalizing white supremacy and racism and practices that may very well be race neutral, both in intent and in phrasing, but that actually work to maintain racism and racist results and white supremacy values, right? And it's clear that when I say white supremacy, I'm not talking about the Klan or Nazis. I'm talking about a value system that puts special importance on whiteness and those values that come with them that we don't even recognize that we're operating at sometimes. And it's that deeper level of institutionalizing equity that also proves to be difficult, right? Because it's looking at every single policy and looking at, okay, what are the outcomes of this policy? What are the results? And while we may be reaching this policy, our goal may be to achieve a particular result, there may be an additional consequence, right, that continues to disadvantage marginalized and targeted groups. And that's what we have to look at. And then once you view those policies in those terms, you then have to decide whether or not you want to change the policies and can be imaginative, creative enough within the organization to come up with a new policy that achieves the same stated goals without maintaining white supremacy.
One thing that strikes me, yeah, thank you for that. One thing that strikes me in the United States, for example, where white supremacy values are the norm, how it is that, I guess, strategies in continuing to look, there not being a very clear example of something devoid of white supremacy. And so having this position with a goal where there's not necessarily a clear example in this culture of what that might look like of getting that point. I wonder what images of inspiration or ways that you find useful in recentering within the organization and the strategies employed to continue to move.
Well, within this particular organization, I have the privilege, right, of working in a culture that is already steeped in this idea of reimagining how we do things. So, um, part of the benefit of a rainbow education, for instance, is a staff and faculty who are dedicated to working to see the whole child and not just judging on the one sort of standard that we typically see, that we judge people in standardized mainstream education, right? So, because we have also, and I don't even, shouldn't even say reimagined, right? Because there's nothing new or necessarily alternative about a holistic education and approaching a child from a holistic standpoint, seeing the whole child. It's not new, so it's not even reimagining that. It's just revisiting what, frankly, is true for many indigenous cultures all around the world. And so, and if I look at it from that standpoint, we actually do have models. We just have to study them, be willing to acknowledge and lift them up as indigenous models, right? That they don't come from a Western European standard, right? That it is a standard and that this is something that we value and perhaps we should revisit. But because we're already in that space of that creativity and imagination, I frankly have full faith that I can work with a team of people who are constantly working on building and deepening their analysis of race and supremacy and oppression and how it shows up, and employing new strategies and being willing to think outside of the box to look for new solutions. That doesn't mean that we've gotten there. By no stretch of the imagination doesn't mean that. I don't think anyone here in this organization thinks that we have. Um, what is valuable is imagination, creativity, and a commitment to pushing through even when we make mistakes and get things wrong. And I think that that's the first approach that we have to take.
It sounds extremely. It's a huge project within an organization within itself to ask those questions. But an interesting part of school is also providing a structure or opportunity for kids who are learning about things like history for the first time or stories and narratives like that. How have you seen that desire of equity influence curriculum and move towards kind of child development also?
Well, I think there's this myth, right, that, like I said, you go through a training or you have a few conversations and that, boom, the light bulbs go off, you have the answers, and you're just moving along. And that just is not how it works. And so what we have are teachers who are continuing to educate themselves and develop an analysis and looking at ways they can employ this thinking in their curriculum. In fact, this year we've been on a year-long teacher-led equity audit of our classrooms, our curriculum, our activities, the way we have discussions in the classroom, where teachers themselves are examining what their approaches are and how they can do things differently based on developmental benchmarks that we have for the ages that they teach. And so some of the easy lifts are looking at the literature that we have in the classrooms. How can we bring more in? Every piece of literature, though, every book that has a child of color on it doesn't always have to be a story about race. or oppression. It can just be a story about a kid whose dog ate his homework, or her homework, or their homework, and the main characters happen to be people of color as well. And so that's an easy lift, though. We can figure that out and try to find more books that are appropriate in that way. Um, we know that we can change the way we talk about race and oppression and be more explicit about what that means and not just teach slavery and civil rights and then there was Barack Obama and things were all better, right? There's so much in between. Furthermore, what we recognize is that teaching the nuances, right, and the things about, for instance, race in America that so many of us weren't taught, so many of us grown folks weren't taught when we were in school, teaching those hard things in between, right? Teaching that there always was resistance, for instance, that Black and Brown people, Indigenous people, we were not just run over. We were always resisting and standing up for ourselves. There were always white allies who joined in the struggle, teaching about, for instance, Reconstruction and the moment in American history when we could have gotten it right, and for all of the political and social reasons that we didn't get it right. That actually increases academic rigor for children, and we value that in this school, right? It teaches them critical thinking. It teaches them not just rote memorization of dates, right, and places and times and names. It teaches them to look at how so much is integrated and comes together, right? That's critical thinking skills, and that I would argue is academic rigor all day long. And so those are some of the things that we can do. But there are others, right, that may not be as explicit, right? So the fact that we are a mindfulness practicing school, right, that we do centering, maybe saying more explicitly that this comes from indigenous cultures and people of color from all around the world, and look at how we value their wisdom that our society has taught us to put aside. But look at how this serves us in this community and serves your ability and serves, in when speaking to parents, serving your child's ability to be here and ready to study and learn, right? There are all kinds of ways every day that we can institutionalize equity in the way that we're teaching and, by the way, make our students more and better prepared to learn and take in information.
Do you see events or other organizations in Asheville that have been supportive in creating a framework of regularly addressing and being involved in as much as it could be, I imagine, extremely frustrating and the amount of work and desire for connection, sharing experience. Can you recommend or name any organizations that have been supportive or we see potential for collaboration for viewers who might be interested in getting involved?
So you mean organizations in the area that are doing this? Well, I mean, obviously, Building Bridges has been here for more than 25 years doing this work, and I encourage anyone and everyone to go to the Building Bridges website, Building Bridges of Asheville, sign up for a session, and participate. In addition to that, though, I think a very complementary training is the REI training that comes here regularly, Racial Equity Institute training. I think those two pieces are complementary pieces and a very good introduction, um, and even more than an introduction, like a deep dive into race and how it's playing out here in Asheville and in ourselves personally, no matter how right we are on all the issues, right? And in our organizations. I think those are two places that have a very good start.
And recently, Rainbow has had a meeting or sort of presentation for what I understand for children and maybe families of children at the school to talk some about that. Also, how has that gone, and do you expect there to be more?
Well, so we for Stand Against Racism, which is the YWCA's national and local project for standing against racism. Obviously, we, in partnership with the Buncombe Partnership for Children, held a talking to young kids about race event. And it was largely for parents or anyone in relation to children, right? So that's teachers, nannies, childcare providers, whatever, to come in and talk about how do we talk to young people about race and racism. And we did that based on developmental stages and benchmarks, the very same ones that we're using for our equity audit here. And so when people registered, right, they registered and listed what age groups they were interested in discussing. So it was 2 to 4 year olds, 5 to 7 year olds, 8 to 10 year olds, and 11 to 14 year olds. And each of those have separate benchmarks and stages of development that we went through and how we can talk about race with those age groups. And it was a magnificent event, I think. I think people really appreciated having the time to sit with real benchmarks and like clues as to what's developmentally appropriate for a child at what age and how we can address race with them. What are they able to understand? I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to start talking to kids about race early and do it often. Because if we are not having that conversation, even as early as 2, we are leaving them open to all of the racist messages we really want to prevent in children. Um, and yes, we do hope to do more. And the other takeaway that came out that we received from folks who attended was that we need to have more of these conversations.
Danae Aicher, thank you so much for speaking with JM Pro.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm glad for the work you do.